Did anyone represent Russia at Versailles?
Well, yes, indirectly. Sazonov, who had been one of the Tsar's foreign secretary, foreign minister at the beginning of the First World War, and also, to a certain degree, Boris Savinkov, who was one of the more extraordinary characters he was sort of a representative, sent as a representative of, at one stage, of Admiral Kolchak. But the trouble was that, you know, they couldn't become official representatives in terms of, they were there very much more as observers. And of course, Churchill, who was hoping to further their cause, would introduce them to whoever might possibly be useful. And Churchill was rather depending very much on Clemenceau, who was another fervent anti-Bolshevik. But the trouble was that the French involvement in 1919, at the very beginning when they were landing troops in Odessa, was at a time where the French army mutinies were still very much at the back of the minds of French poilus and sailors. And then there was this great mutiny of the Black Sea Fleet. So France found itself in a very embarrassed and difficult position there, and I don't think very much more took place. It was therefore very much more the British who were really the key supporters of the Whites in the Black Sea region.
Okay, yep.
Why did the Bolsheviks not destroy the Tsarist sort of heritage? You know, all the palaces, the art, everything was preserved. Was this about their sense of their history, or why do you think it was?
Sorry,
why did the Bolsheviks not destroy all the Tsarist art collections and palaces and things like that?
Well, no, they didn't destroy all of the art collections. In fact, what they wanted to do was to flog them off. I mean, even at a very early stage, I was rather intrigued when one of the former Guards regiments of the Finlandsky, they immediately sort of said, we will seize all the regimental silver and melt it down so as to help prop up the ruble. Well, I'm afraid the ruble was already diving through the floor, so I didn't think that that particular collection helped. But the destruction on the whole took place much more in the countryside, not by the Bolsheviks, but usually by the enraged peasants or whatever, who wanted to basically destroy the past. Whether it was a question of sort of, pulling it down, burning it up, or literally in some cases, basically defiling it. And the art collections on the whole, they tended to sort of sell off little bits here and there. And there was a vast amount in the early 1920s, which was sold in Western Europe, purely so as to sort of prop up the terribly fragile Soviet economy.
Right. We've got more questions at the front. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Good evening. Thanks very much for a very informative discussion. You haven't mentioned the Romanovs.
Yeah, we didn't do that. What do you want to know?
Why do you think they murdered the Romanovs and didn't put them into exile?
I think, again, it's a question of abolishing the past, the idea that if you can destroy everything, they can't come back. So it wasn't just a question of massacring the imperial family at Ekaterinburg. It was also a question of killing off all of the Grand Dukes. And there were several of them, quite a few of them, in fact, still trapped in Siberia in cities not that far from Ekaterinburg. Now, the Soviet account basically tries to imply it was the threat of the Czech forces advancing towards Ekaterinburg which made it essential, if you like, for them to get rid of the Tsar. But at the same time, in fact, I think that recent research has shown that actually it was Lenin who was determined to eliminate the whole of the royal family, purely so as to make sure that there could never be a figurehead or... he preferred to have, if you like, a martyr rather than have a potential leader for the future.
Yes, go for it.
Hi there. I've just got a question about your research. So, given that the Kremlin likes to have quite tight control on information, even nowadays, and increasingly so, was there any difficulty when it came to primary Russian source material and getting access to that?
Well, I've been actually, and it's a very good opportunity, to pay tribute to Luba Vinogradova, who I've worked with now for 28 years, ever since 1994 when we were working on Stalingrad together. I can't go back to Russia, for some fairly obvious reasons, but Luba has been doing, extraordinary work over the last 5 years. In going through all of these different archives. We will obviously be in touch the whole time. She will provide me with a sort of bit of a menu from the catalogue and so forth. But she has such an extraordinary instinct for, the right vignette, anecdote, whatever it might be, example from diaries, letters, whatever. And as I say, this book simply would not have existed at all, or in any good form, if you like, without her extraordinary work. So I've been phenomenally lucky, but I don't think I will ever be able to do it again. It was very striking that in the first days of, from February the 24th, there were a number of fellow historians, and to me also, who were extremely worried as one saw the charge towards Kiev, thinking about the archives, because actually the Ukrainian archives have been a godsend for many historians, Tim Snyder, a whole lot of others, from the point of view that the material which is often blocked in the Moscow archives, you will find copies which have been sent to Ukraine or to the Ukrainian Communist Party during that particular period. So it was one way of sort of getting around some of those barriers. And also paying tribute to Ezgi Cihan, who was my Ukrainian researcher, who is now fighting on the edge of Kharkiv with the 10th Battalion of the Territorial Defense.
Really? Yes. Oh.
Right.
We've got one over here, yeah. One over
and
here.
then up in the second row as well. Yep.
Hello. Yes, I just wanted to ask, what was the position of the Russian Orthodox Church during all this period, both before the revolutions and during the Civil War?
Well, the position of the Russian Orthodox Church was basically one of subservience in a way and support for the Tsarist forces. The priests, though, were, in many cases, if they weren't killed by local mobs or chased off by local mobs, were very soon rounded up by the communists. Most of them were sent to the Solovetsky Islands in the White Sea, where many of them died or froze to death. In a fairly rapid form. And then you've also got that period immediately just after or towards the end of the Civil War, already really starting in 1920, when, of course, the Bolsheviks were already taking all of the church treasures, ready to melt down, to convert into currency or to convert into some form of financial exchange with the either with outside countries or in many cases basically to smuggle across borders and get currency for the continuation of the war. So it wasn't until suddenly we get in late 1941 Stalin actually resurrecting in a very artificial way the Orthodox Church as part of his idea of the great patriotic, the great fatherland war. You have that period where, of course, all form of religion or any notion of religion was almost a capital offense. So that was the sort of the period of, if you like, the death of religion for that period of the communist era.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your discussion so far. I look forward to reading the book. And as someone who's read your books on Berlin and Spain and what happened in Stalingrad, I think we're all interested to know how you see things evolving in the war in Russia at the moment. So with regard to that, there's sort of two narratives maybe. that Russia has felt threatened by NATO, arguably, and by America post the wall coming down in Germany and the expansion of NATO satellite states on the edge of Russia, a country which doesn't have mountains, isn't that well protected, and has been attacked before, versus the obvious horror of the bombardment of Ukraine, completely uncalled for. I'm just interested to get your take, given your understanding and research on all these other battles, how you see the direction of travel, perhaps, and what your sort of take is on how this might play out, if you're okay to go down
How
that
the
road.
Ukraine war is going to
Yeah,
play out. Yes.
how might it play out?
Well, I think that anybody who sort of makes a firm prediction is almost, it's like really just putting all of your money on zero on a roulette wheel and hoping for the best, because it could turn out in so many ways. One thing I think is pretty clear is I'm afraid it's going to grind on for well into the winter, and it may well be worse. It will depend on a number of other things. Putin's health, which I think actually could be possibly a major factor. To what degree he is so enraged that he is prepared to terrify. Putin wants to be feared, rather like Stalin. He doesn't want to be loved in any way. He wants to be feared. And his obsession is, as we know, the sort of reconstitution, not just of the Soviet Union so much as of the Russian Empire. So he could do one or two, and he loves shocking and surprising and putting off his opponents, or basically tweaking their tails, or basically surprising them completely. So we may see, as have been warned, there might be a tactical nuclear explosion purely to warn us off. But I mean, the trouble is that his rhetoric keeps changing. We start off with Ukrainian brothers and sisters who just need to be brought back into the fold. Then we've told they're all Nazis. Now we're being told that it's sort of, this is actually a war which has been launched against Russia by the West and by NATO. So while the play scenario sort of keeps changing, again, perhaps deliberately to confuse us, we do know that things are totally unpredictable in the way that he could basically do something really very crazy indeed. The trouble is that there's nobody really there who can supplant him, get rid of him. I don't think we're going to see a palace coup or anything like that. But the real danger, particularly for Ukraine, is that Putin cannot be trusted. He has completely rejected the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, which actually guarantees the security of Ukraine, and it was signed by Russia, by the United States, and by Britain. And then subsequently by other countries, when Ukraine handed over all of its nuclear weapons to Russia as part of the disarmament process after the end of the Soviet Union. So, if you were in Zelensky's position, can you make a compromise peace with, maybe you could say, well, we could put up with the loss of Crimea because it's a fait accompli. But if they are still dominating the Donbass and as part of the southern coast, for Putin, it's a question of establishing your position there. And then you could sort of say, right, I'll agree to this. But then just 2 months later, using the old Napoleonic maxim of reculer pour mieux sauter, you just come back and attack again. So what guarantee? I mean, Ukraine has got to have a firm guarantee. And logically, the only firm guarantee is membership of NATO, which is something which Putin will never be able to accept.
Yes.
Hello. Sorry. You talked about the suffering of the people with the typhus and starvation. And I just wonder what was Lenin's attitude to the suffering that was going on for the people, presumably, who he'd started the revolution for?
Sorry, the suffering.
So yes, great question.
Yes.
Do we know what Lenin was thinking? He started a revolution to benefit all these peasants and the people at the bottom of society. They're all dying of typhus, having a rubbish time. What's he thinking?
Well, I haven't been able to ask him, I'm afraid, but I don't think that he thought very much about it. I mean, this was actually the terrifying thing. I mean, the belief in your ideology, which is basically prepared to sacrifice the present generation for a supposedly better future, is part of a political ideology which has no humanity in it whatsoever. So from that point of view, I don't think that he really did worry very much about it. I mean, as far as he was concerned, you know, it was the awful old cliche about breaking eggs to make an omelette. You know, that could have included a very large proportion of the Russian people. And so from that point of view, no, I think that this is where one sees the sort of, if you like, the true inhumanity of that system, which in a totally different way was about as inhuman as perhaps as the Nazi system, where you have total contempt. I mean, even in Germany, I mean, you see the way that Hitler was totally uninterested in the suffering of his own soldiers and the suffering of his own civilians. We see that with Stalin. At the end of the Second World War, Stalin was well aware that Russian casualties were over 20 million. But as the wonderful Professor David Reynolds of Cambridge pointed out, although Stalin knew that there were more than 20 million, he was only prepared to admit to 7 million because he thought that sounded suitably heroic but not homicidal.
I think we're running out of time. We've got one more.
One more, yeah.
Hello. I'm just curious on your thoughts of the role of Baltic nationalists in the Russian Civil War, because I think that it's sort of often like sidelined, but I think it's quite an interesting topic.
The Baltic nationalists, they often get sidelined.
Well, the Baltic nationalists, if you like, the Baltic states had very separate and distinct cultures. And their opportunity for liberation did come, of course, with in 1918 and 1919. During that period of great weakness for the communists, and they had a very effective, the Estonian commander-in-chief, Leedona, was one of the most impressive of the leaders during this particular period. And they fought back the Red attacks very effectively. But also, they dealt with the whites in the sense that they didn't want to be contaminated by the whites, so they were able to eventually make a peace treaty with the communists on the understanding that they got rid of General Yudenich's white forces and disarmed them, and this they proceeded to do. So they then had a period of independence, which lasted really from 1919 all the way through to 1939, when, of course, the Nazi-Soviet pact basically pushed them back into the hands of Stalin and the Soviet Union. And that was the end of their independence until all the way through to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 89, 92, whichever date you wish to prefer.
I'm just going to finish up asking one quick question. One sentence answer, but you've written these books featuring some of the most awful and barbaric accounts of what us humans are capable of doing to each other. How do you have to go out in the garden, look at some cherry blossom? What is your coping mechanism for being so immersed all day in these sources?
Well, I can remember really from sort of the Stalingrad days, and we're working with Luber in the archives. I mean, you know, some of the things, especially of starvation and all the rest of it. I mean, it was impossible to look at a plate of food for a very long time without thinking, you know, how many people that would have fed at that particular time. And then there were the horrors of Berlin, which for Luber was sort of even worse when one was dealing with the accounts from the Russian archives on their treatment of women, especially not just in Germany, but I mean even of Russian women and girls and Ukrainian women and girls who've been sent back to Germany for slave labor, who are also being violated by soldiers of the Red Army at that particular time. And that was very, very hard. That was very hard to take, and particularly for Luba, who'd been sort of brought up with admiration for the heroism of the Red Army soldier. I mean, there is no way. I mean, you wake up quite often sort of, at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and it'll suddenly hit you. But the vital thing is, when you're actually in the archive, you've got to keep a very cool head, and you've got to get it down accurately. And, then perhaps the effect and the consequences come later.
Well, thank you for putting yourself through that and producing these extraordinary books, and perhaps your family as well. And producing these extraordinary books that we've all enjoyed so much over the years. You will be signing?
Yes.
Yes?
Yep.
There will be a signing, so you can get your copy, obviously. But thank you very much, Antony Beevor.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.